You wake up tired not because you slept poorly, though you probably did, but because you're already thinking about everything you have to do today. Before your feet hit the floor, you're calculating the emails, the meetings, the errands, the texts you haven't answered, the bills, the performance reviews, the social obligations you don't actually want to attend. And underneath it all, there's this low hum of dread you can't quite name. You're not depressed, you're not lazy, you're not weak. You're just carrying the weight of a world designed to drain you. Carl Jung understood something most people still don't. Modern life isn't hard because you're failing, it's hard by design. The structures we live inside, the jobs, the cities, the technology, the pace, the expectations, they weren't built for human beings. They were built for productivity, for efficiency, for control. And somewhere along the way, we stopped asking whether any of this was making us better. We just kept going, faster, harder, until we forgot what it felt like to be light. This video isn't about self-care. It's not about resilience or grit or finding your purpose. It's about understanding why modern life feels so mentally heavy and what Jung believed we're actually carrying. Let's start with the feeling itself, that heaviness, that exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. Jung would call it psychic weight, the accumulated pressure of living in a world that demands more than your nervous system was designed to handle. You wake up and within seconds you're accessible to the entire world. Your phone lights up with notifications, work emails, news alerts, messages from people you haven't thought about in years. Algorithmic reminders of things you should buy, watch, care about. Before you've even brushed your teeth, you've been asked to respond to 30 different inputs, and every single one of them is framed as urgent. Jung wrote about this in the 1930s, before smartphones, before social media, before the 24-hour news cycle. He saw it coming. He warned that modern civilization was creating a kind of psychological overload, a state where the mind is constantly activated but never allowed to rest, never allowed to integrate, never allowed to just be. And here's the thing, your brain doesn't distinguish between a work deadline and a lion chasing you. Stress is stress. Whether it's an email from your boss or a predator in the wild, your nervous system responds the same way. Cortisol spikes, heart rate increases, muscles tense. Except in the wild, the threat ends. You either escape or you don't. But in modern life, the threat never ends. It just keeps coming. One notification after another. One demand after another. One crisis after another. You're not struggling because you're weak. You're struggling because you're living in a state of permanent emergency, and your body doesn't know how to turn it off. Jung believed that this kind of existence, this constant stimulation without relief, was making people sick, not just physically but psychologically. Because when the mind never rests, it never integrates, it never processes, it just accumulates like a hard drive that's never cleared. Eventually it crashes. And that's what you're feeling, that heaviness, that exhaustion, that sense that you're carrying something you can't put down. You're carrying the unprocessed weight of modern existence. Jung wasn't a Luddite. He didn't think technology or progress was inherently evil, but he understood something most people miss. The systems we create eventually shape us. And modern life, especially industrial and post-industrial society, was designed around efficiency, not humanity. Think about your day, how much of it is actually yours, how much of your time, your energy, your attention is spent doing what you want versus what the system demands. You wake up to an alarm, you commute to a job, you sit in meetings, you answer emails, you perform tasks, you consume content, you scroll, you sleep, you repeat. Where in any of that is you? Jung called this collective possession, the state of being so absorbed into societal structures that you lose contact with your individual self. You become a function, a role, a cog, and the terrifying part is that most people don't even notice it's happening. They just feel tired, heavy, like something's wrong, but they can't say what. Modern life operates like a machine, and machines don't care about meaning. They care about output. You're rewarded for being productive, not for being human. You're rewarded for being fast, not for being thoughtful. You're rewarded for being available, not for being present. And so you adapt, you learn to move faster, to multitask, to optimize, to perform. And somewhere along the way, you stop asking the question Jung thought was the most important one: what am I becoming? Because here's the truth, you're becoming something. You're not the same person you were 5 years ago. The structures you live inside are shaping you. The pace is changing your nervous system. The constant connectivity is rewiring your brain. The lack of stillness is eroding your ability to think deeply, to feel deeply, to be deeply. Jung believed that when you lose contact with your inner world, when your life becomes entirely reactive, entirely external, you stop individuating. You stop becoming yourself, and that's when the heaviness sets in. Because on some unconscious level, you know you're not living your life. You're living the life the system needs you to live, and it's killing you. Here's where it gets darker, because the weight you're carrying isn't just exhaustion, it's suppression. It's everything you've had to bury in order to keep functioning in a world that doesn't have space for your full humanity. Jung talked about the shadow, the parts of yourself you disown because they don't fit. In modern life, that shadow is massive, because modern life doesn't want your anger, it doesn't want your sadness, it doesn't want your grief or your confusion or your doubt. It wants you productive, it wants you functional. It wants you smiling in the Zoom call, responding to emails within the hour, performing competence even when you feel like you're falling apart. And so you bury it, you bury the rage at a system that extracts your labor and gives you just enough to survive but not enough to rest. You bury the grief of a life that feels like it's passing you by while you're stuck in traffic or staring at spreadsheets. You bury the exhaustion that never gets acknowledged because everyone else seems fine, so you must be the problem. But the shadow doesn't disappear when you bury it, it just gets heavier, and eventually it leaks. It leaks as anxiety, as insomnia, as irritability, as numbness, as the feeling that you're going through the motions but not actually living. Jung believed that the modern world creates a kind of collective shadow, a shared psychic space where all the things we're not allowed to feel get stored. And when you're part of that system, you're not just carrying your shadow. You're carrying the shadow of an entire civilization that's built on suppression, speed, and extraction. You're not supposed to slow down, you're not supposed to question, you're not supposed to feel the full weight of what this way of life is doing to you, because if you did, you might stop, you might step out, you might refuse. And the system can't have that, so it keeps you busy, it keeps you distracted, it keeps you just stressed enough that you never have time to ask the bigger questions. But your body knows, your nervous system knows, your unconscious knows, and that's why you feel heavy. Because you're not just tired from doing too much, you're tired from feeling too little, from burying too much, from performing a version of yourself that isn't real. Here's one of the cruelest parts. Modern life gives you the illusion of freedom while actually giving you very little. You can choose your coffee flavor, your Netflix show, your Instagram aesthetic, but can you choose to not participate? Can you choose to live at a different pace? Can you choose to prioritize rest, meaning, and depth over productivity and visibility? Not really, not without serious consequences. Jung understood that modern capitalism and the culture it produces operates through a kind of voluntary imprisonment. You're not forced at gunpoint to work 50 hours a week, to check your email on weekends, to stay plugged into the news cycle. You choose it, but the choice isn't really free, because if you don't, you lose your income, you lose your status, you lose your place in the social order. And so you comply, you adapt, you internalize the logic of the system until it becomes your own logic, until you're the one telling yourself to work harder, to do more, to optimize, to keep up. The system doesn't even need to coerce you anymore. You've become your own enforcer. Jung called this identification with the collective, and it's one of the most dangerous psychological states you can be in, because when you identify completely with external structures, with your job, your role, your productivity, your image, you lose access to your inner world. You lose access to what Jung called the self, the deeper, truer center of who you are. And that loss is what creates the heaviness, because on some level you know you're living a life that isn't yours, you know you're performing a script someone else wrote, you know you're exhausted not from effort but from self-betrayal. But you can't admit it, because if you did, everything would have to change, and change is terrifying, so you keep going, you keep performing, you keep pretending the heaviness is normal, that everyone feels this way, that this is just what adulthood is. But it's not, it's what this system demands, and there's a difference. Let's talk about the self-care industrial complex for a second, because it's one of the ways modern life manages your exhaustion without actually addressing the cause. You're tired, so you're told to meditate, to do yoga, to take a bath, to practice gratitude, to journal, to set boundaries, and all of that is fine. But here's the problem: it treats your exhaustion as a personal problem when it's actually a structural one. Jung would say that self-care, as it's currently marketed, is a kind of psychological sedation. It's designed to keep you functional within the system, not to help you question the system itself. It's maintenance, not transformation. Because the truth is, you can't self-care your way out of a 60-hour work week. You can't meditate your way out of systemic inequality. You can't boundary set your way out of a culture that treats rest as laziness and exhaustion as virtue. The heaviness you feel isn't a personal failing, it's a collective condition. And until we start naming it as such, until we start talking about the ways modern life is structurally exhausting, alienating, and dehumanizing, all the bubble baths in the world won't help. Jung believed that real healing requires confrontation, not with yourself but with the structures that shape you. It requires asking, what is this system asking me to become, and do I consent? Most people never ask that question. They just assume the exhaustion is theirs to manage, that if they were stronger, smarter, more disciplined, they'd be fine. But that's the lie the system needs you to believe, because if you blame the system, you might stop participating. You might demand something different. you might realize that the heaviness isn't yours to carry alone. So what are you carrying? What is this weight? Jung would say you're carrying several things. Let me name them. The unlived life, the version of yourself you didn't become because it wasn't practical, the dreams you shelved, the passions you abandoned, the curiosity you suppressed, the parts of yourself that didn't fit into the career path, the social role, the family expectations. That unlived life doesn't disappear. It sits in your unconscious and it weighs. The shadow of the collective, the things we as a society refuse to acknowledge, the exploitation, the inequality, the environmental destruction, the loneliness epidemic, the mental health crisis. You're not just carrying your own pain. You're carrying the unprocessed pain of an entire culture that's running on fumes and calling it ambition. The disconnection from meaning. Jung believed that humans need meaning the way they need food and water, but modern life doesn't provide meaning. It provides distraction, it provides consumption, it provides the illusion of progress. But meaning, purpose, a sense that your life matters beyond your productivity, that's rare, and the absence of it is crushing. The pace itself, you're moving too fast. Your mind, your body, your nervous system, they can't keep up. Evolution didn't prepare you for this. You're a creature designed for slowness, for seasonality, for rhythm, and you're living in a world that demands constant acceleration. That dissonance is exhausting, not because you're weak, because you're human. Jung believed that when you carry all of this without awareness, it manifests as symptoms. Depression, anxiety, insomnia, rage, numbness, addiction. These aren't personal failures. They're psychic alarm bells. Your unconscious is screaming, this isn't working. This isn't sustainable. Something has to change. But most people don't listen. They medicate the symptoms. They push through. They double down on the grind, and the weight keeps growing. So what do? How do you live in a system that's designed to drain you without losing yourself completely? Jung wouldn't tell you to quit your job and move to the woods. He wasn't naive. He understood that most people can't just opt out, but he also believed that consciousness changes everything. That when you become aware of what's happening to you, you gain the ability to choose differently. Not perfectly, not easily, but differently. Here's what that looks like in practice. Stop pretending the exhaustion is normal. Name it out loud to yourself, to others. I'm tired because I'm carrying too much and most of it isn't mine. That simple act of numbing breaks the trance. Reclaim small pockets of time, not for productivity, not for self-improvement, for nothing, for staring out the window, for walking without your phone, for sitting in silence. Jung called this active stillness, the practice of being present without agenda. It's the opposite of everything modern life teaches you, and it's essential. Stop outsourcing your inner life. You don't need another podcast, another guru, another framework. You need time with yourself, your thoughts, your feelings, your questions. Jung believed that the answers you need are already inside you, but you can't hear them if you're constantly consuming someone else's voice. Identify what you're carrying that isn't yours, the job that drains you because it's someone else's dream, the relationship you're maintaining out of guilt, the identity you're performing because it makes other people comfortable. Jung would say, put it down, not all at once, but gradually, consciously, with intention. Build a life that has room for meaning, not someday, not when you retire, now, even if it's small. Even if it's 10 minutes a day spent on something that matters to you for no reason other than it matters. Meaning isn't a luxury, it's a psychological necessity, and you won't find it by optimizing your productivity. You'll find it by choosing depth over speed. Allow yourself to grieve for the life you thought you'd have, for the person you thought you'd become, for the world you thought you were building. Grief is the weight of unlived potential, and until you let yourself feel it, it just sits there, heavy and unprocessed. This isn't a fix, it's a practice. A lifelong one, because the system isn't going to change overnight, but you can, slowly, deliberately, one choice at a time. Here's the thing Jung understood that most people still don't. When you reclaim your inner life, you're not just helping yourself, you're disrupting the system. Because the system needs you exhausted, it needs you distracted, it needs you too busy to think, too tired to question, too isolated to organize. Your exhaustion isn't a bug, it's a feature. But when you slow down, when you start asking the deeper questions, when you stop performing and start being, you become dangerous. Not in a violent way, in a conscious way. You stop being easy to control. You stop being easy to exploit. You stop being a function and start being a person. And that matters because the world doesn't need more productivity. It needs more humanity. It needs people who can think deeply, feel deeply, and live with intention. It needs people who refuse to carry the weight of a broken system and instead build something different. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming yourself, was both a personal and a political act, because when you individuate, you stop replicating the patterns of the collective, you stop passing on the trauma, the exhaustion, the disconnection, you break the cycle. And that's how change happens, not through revolution, through evolution. One person at a time, choosing consciousness over convenience, choosing depth over speed, choosing meaning over productivity. You're not just tired, you're carrying the weight of a world that's forgotten how to be human, and the most radical thing you can do is put it down. Let me end with this. The heaviness you feel isn't a sign that you're failing, it's a sign that you're paying attention, that somewhere inside you know this isn't sustainable, that you're not meant to live like this. Jung said there is no coming to consciousness without pain, and he was right. Waking up to what modern life is doing to you hurts. It's easier to stay numb, to stay distracted, to keep going. But the price of that numbness is your life. You don't have to carry this weight forever. You don't have to keep performing. You don't have to keep pretending the exhaustion is normal. You can choose differently, not perfectly, not all at once, but gradually, consciously, with intention. The system will tell you that's selfish, that you should push through, that you should be grateful for what you have, but Jung would say the system is lying, because a system that requires your exhaustion to function is a system that doesn't care if you survive. So choose survival, choose consciousness, choose yourself. Not because it's easy, because it's real. You're not weak, you're not failing, you're not broken. You're just carrying the weight of a world designed to drain you. And the moment you realize that, the moment you name it, feel it, and choose to put some of it down, everything changes. Not the system, but you. And that's where it starts.